Title: He Will Not Stop. Why Grant Kept Attacking. Even when his own generals begged him to halt, the year is 1864. For 3 years, the American Civil War has consumed the continent. 1,000,000 men have marched, fought, and died in places that have become synonymous with slaughter. Bull Run, Shiloh, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Gettysburg. The names are carved into the national memory like wounds that refuse to heal. And for 3 years, the Union has been looking for a general, not a strategist, not a patriot, a fighter. They have found him. His name is Ulysses S. Grant. And in the spring of 1864, he is given a task that has broken every man who came before him. Go east, take command of all Union armies, and defeat Robert E. Lee. The Army of the Potomac, the Union's largest and most celebrated force, has a reputation. It is a graveyard for generals. They arrive with maps and theories, and they leave with shattered reputations and lists of the dead. Grant arrives not with a grand plan, but with a simple, horrifying philosophy. He has looked at the map, and he has seen a single, brutal truth. The Union has the men, the Union has the industry, the Union has the supplies. The Confederacy has one thing: a slim margin for error. Grant's strategy is not to outmaneuver Lee. It is to destroy him, to grind him down, to fight a war of attrition so relentless, so bloody, that the Confederate Army simply ceases to exist. This is not a story about strategy. It is a story about resolve, about a man who was willing to push his own army to the breaking point and beyond, while his own generals, his closest advisors, begged him to stop. This is the story of the Overland Campaign, and its name tells you everything you need to know. Overland, no flanking, no retreat, just forward, always forward. A period map of Virginia, crisscrossed with rivers and dotted with small towns. A line representing Grant's army begins to move from the top. Heading south, the camera slowly pans over the wilderness, Spotsylvania, North Anna, Cold Harbor. The names are marked with a stark red X. On May 4th, 1864, the Army of the Potomac crosses the Rapidan River and enters a place called the Wilderness. It is a dense, second-growth forest, a tangled labyrinth of scrub oak and pine, so thick that men can lose sight of their comrades 10 feet away. It is, by all accounts, the worst possible place to fight a battle. There is no room for cavalry, no room for artillery. It is a place where war reverts to its most primal form, man against man in the smoke and the dark. Lee, the old fox, knows this. He strikes immediately. For 2 days, from May 5th to May 7th, the armies clash in a blind, chaotic hell. The woods catch fire. The wounded trapped in the undergrowth are burned alive. Men choke on smoke and gunpowder. They fire at shadows. They stab at shapes in the brush. The battle is a stalemate, but the cost is staggering. The Union Army suffers over 17,000 casualties in those 2 days. Men are shattered, regiments evaporate. On the night of May 7th, Grant's generals gather. They are exhausted. They are bloodied. They look at the map, and they see the familiar pattern. Every Union general before them, McClellan, Burnside, Hooker, after a bloody repulse in this same wilderness, had done the same thing. They had retreated. They had pulled back across the Rapidan to regroup, to lick their wounds. They expected Grant to do the same. One of his corps commanders, General John Gibbon, approaches him. The conversation is captured in memoirs, the words passed down. Gibbon, with the quiet desperation of a man who has seen too many of his soldiers fall, says to Grant, "General, I hope you are not going to fight Lee here in the wilderness." Grant looks at him. He doesn't offer a grand speech. He doesn't pull out a map. He simply says, "I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer." Then he does something that shocks the army. He does not order a retreat. He orders a march, but not north, to safety. He orders them south, to the left, toward Spotsylvania Courthouse. He is flanking Lee. He is moving around his right, driving between Lee and the Confederate capital of Richmond. The army, which had braced itself for the humiliation of another retreat, is stunned. A ripple of relief passes through the ranks. A soldier later wrote, "We felt that we had a general who would not give up, but this was not a moment of triumph. It was a moment of transition. The war was about to enter a new, darker phase, because Grant was not just moving around Lee. He was committing to a campaign of continuous, relentless combat. No more seasons of campaigning followed by winter quarters. No more pauses. He understood that Lee's army was like a blade, magnificently sharp but brittle. The only way to break it was to keep hammering over and over in the same spot, even if the hammer itself began to crack. They marched through the night, the Union column stretching for miles. But Lee is faster. He gets to Spotsylvania first. He digs in. And now the pattern of the campaign is set. Grant attacks. Lee builds fortifications, log walls, trenches, headlogs, with a speed and skill that has become legendary. The Union attacks again and again. The fighting at Spotsylvania lasts for nearly 2 weeks. It culminates at a place that will become forever known as the Bloody Angle. At the salient, a bulge in the Confederate lines called the Muleshoe, Grant launches a massive assault on May 12th. For 20 hours in a driving rain that turns the trenches into rivers of mud and blood, men fight hand to hand. They clamber over the bodies of the dead and dying to fire their muskets. They use bayonets, rifle butts, rocks, and fists. A massive oak tree, 22 inches in diameter, is cut down by musket balls. Men die and are trampled into the mud. When it is over, the Union has lost another 12,000 men. The Confederates, 9,000. And here is where the begging begins. Not in formal letters, but in the desperate, weary counsel of his own officers. Men like Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, the hero of Gettysburg, whose own corps has been shattered in the assault. They come to Grant, their faces gray with exhaustion and grief. They show him the butcher's bill. They tell him his army is bleeding out. They tell him they need time to reorganize, to replenish their ammunition, to bury their dead. General Meade, the formal commander of the Army of the Potomac, is there. He and Grant have a complex relationship. Meade is a brilliant engineer, a man of maps and lines. He looks at the situation and sees the cold mathematics of it. He sees that his army is losing a higher percentage of its men than the enemy. He argues for a pause, for a change in tactics, for a turning movement to get around Lee without another head-on slaughter. But Grant will not stop. He has a clarity of vision that borders on the inhuman. He knows that if he pauses, if he gives Lee a week, a day, even a few hours, Lee will use that time to build his fortifications even stronger. Every pause is a gift to the defender. To Grant, the idea of resting the army was a luxury they could not afford. Rest to him meant letting Lee rest too. And a rested Lee was an unbeatable Lee. He listens to his generals. He acknowledges their pain. He sees the same bodies they do. But he gives the order that will define his legacy. He points south again. We move again. We flank him again. We hit him again. The Army, in its letters home, begins to understand. A soldier in the 5th New Hampshire writes, "We all think Grant is a butcher. He doesn't value the life of a soldier. He will get us all killed before he is done." Another writes, with a different kind of horror, "He is a man of one idea. That idea is to fight." This was the central tension of the Overland campaign. The men in the ranks, and even the men at the top, saw the immediate horror. Grant was seeing the war from a different altitude. He was no longer commanding an army. He was commanding the entire machinery of the Union war effort, and that machinery was designed to absorb losses that the Confederacy could not. He was playing a game of economic and demographic attrition. The North had a population of 22 million. The South, 9 million, of which over 3 million were enslaved. For every Union soldier who fell, Grant knew he had another waiting in a recruitment depot. For every Confederate who fell, the South was dipping into a pool that was rapidly running dry. It was a cold, mathematical truth, but it was one that had to be executed with a will of iron, a will that could withstand the pleas of his own comrades, the horror in the eyes of his own soldiers, and the growing chorus of condemnation from the Northern press, who were already calling him Grant the Butcher. He was not a butcher. A butcher kills for the sake of killing. Grant killed for the sake of ending the killing. It is a paradox that defined his life. He was a man who hated the sight of blood, who could not stand to see a wounded animal suffer, and yet he ordered the most relentless, bloody campaign in American history. The poet Walt Whitman, who worked as a nurse in the Washington hospitals during the war, saw the endless stream of wounded from Grant's campaign. He wrote of the trains pulling into the city, the broken, the dying, the ghastly. He said of Grant, "He is a man of the most remarkable, imperturbable, and inscrutable nature. He never talks, he never explains. He sits there silent and does his work." That was Grant, silent, inscrutable, and unstoppable. He did not stop at the Wilderness. He did not stop at Spotsylvania. He did not stop at Cold Harbor, even when he knew he had made a terrible mistake. He did not stop at the gates of Petersburg, even when the siege stretched into months. He did not stop until, on a quiet spring day in a parlor in Appomattox, Robert E. Lee surrendered his army. The war was over, and in that moment, the man who had been called a butcher, the man whose own generals had begged him to stop, showed the other side of his nature. He offered generous terms. He let the Confederate soldiers keep their horses and their mules for the spring planting. He ordered his own men to stop cheering. He said, "The war is over. The rebels are our countrymen again." He had done what he was brought east to do. He had destroyed Lee's army. He had saved the Union. And he had done it by refusing to stop, even when everyone around him, from his own generals to the president himself, wondered if the price was too high. He would later say in a letter to a friend, "I had nothing to do with the fighting. I simply kept moving." Simply kept moving. It is the most modest description of one of the most brutal and consequential campaigns in history. But it is the truth. He kept moving. He kept attacking. And because he did, the United States of America remained one nation, indivisible. He will not stop. The words were not a boast. They were a promise he made to the nation, to the soldiers in the ranks, and to himself. A promise he kept no matter the cost.